Thank you, Kamala. I could almost just sit down now, I think. I want to pick up what Kamala said about the Trevorrow case. Everyone so far has acknowledged the traditional owners of the land we meet on. Bruce Trevorrow was born on the 26th of November 1956. I remember being at school in short pants that year. Bruce was born at 1 Mile Camp, Meningie. Now Meningie is a very small town on the banks of the Coorong. He was born at 1 Mile Camp, which was an Aboriginal settlement of humpies and tents. He was born there because in November 1956, when he was born, it was unlawful for Aboriginal people to live closer than 1 mile to a place of white settlement. This was people not allowed to live on the land which they had occupied for 60 or so thousand years. 250 years ago, our ancestors dropped in and booted them out and started treating them like that. That is what the acknowledgement should acknowledge. That we, our ancestors, took over the land from them. We took it over even though they had looked after it so well for so long. Now, Bruce got very sick when he was 13 months old on Christmas Day 1957. Some people in Meningie drove him to Adelaide Children's Hospital because he needed medical help. He was diagnosed as having gastroenteritis, and there was a wave of that going through Adelaide or through South Australia at the time. He was treated appropriately at the Adelaide Children's Hospital, and a week later he was better, and a week after that he was given away to a white family who lived in suburban Adelaide. And that was the event which was later found in the Supreme Court of South Australia to be unlawful. Proving how damaged he was by this episode was very, very difficult, as you can imagine. He had two brothers, Tom and George Trevorrow. Tom and George grew up to be leaders of the Nurrungeri community, which is the Aboriginal group that lives around that area. When we got judgment, which was August of 2007, very soon after the election campaign began, which resulted in the election of the Rudd government #1. And Kevin Rudd, being Kevin Rudd, announced that the first order of business of the new Parliament would be an apology to the stolen generations. And being who he is, he wanted to have as many Aboriginal people as possible in the public gallery of the House of Representatives. Tom and George Trevorrow were invited, Bruce wasn't. We sent a quick reminder to the authorities and they hurried out an invitation to him. But that is how we treat Aboriginal people in this country. We treat them as if they do not exist. And we really need to do a lot better. And I think the acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the land we meet on could go a bit further. If we only could bring ourselves to acknowledge that we have treated them appallingly. And you may remember, in the 1950s and 60s, they were treated as if they were worse than dirt. They were treated incredibly badly. If any of us was treated like that, as badly as that, we would be horrified. But that's the way it goes. Now, I've been asked to speak this morning about human rights. I say this morning, I mean this afternoon, about human rights. And I want to dwell on two aspects of it. First, of course, asylum seekers. Now, asylum seekers and refugees is a distinction which many people have difficulty with. An asylum seeker is a person who comes to this country saying they're a refugee and wanting to be accepted as a refugee. They typically come here as boat people, and Scott Morrison, sorry for mentioning that name, Scott Morrison prides himself on the fact that he stopped the boats. In fact, in his office he had a model of an asylum seeker boat with a sign on it, "I stopped these." Well, I don't think that's anything to be proud of. I'll mention a few different possibilities later of the way we should treat refugees, but they do not need to be treated as badly as we treat them. And certainly they do not deserve to be treated as badly as we've treated Aborigines in the past. Carmel mentioned that I did the Tampa case. Some of you may remember that. The Tampa was a Norwegian cargo ship, and in about August of 2001 there was an asylum seeker boat travelling from Indonesia towards Christmas Island. It ran into trouble. The government had been keeping its eye on that boat, and it knew that the Tampa was in the area, northeastern Australia or northwestern Australia, and so it contacted the Tampa and said, would you go and check on the people who were being carried by the Palapa, the little boat? And the captain of the Tampa did, saw that the Palapa was in serious trouble, threw a rope deck over the side and thought that, threw a rope ladder over the side and thought that they would get maybe half a dozen people climbing up onto the deck. He was astounded when 438 people climbed up the rope ladder onto the deck of the Tampa. Now the Australian government immediately closed the airspace over Christmas Island so that people would not be able to see the plight of the people stuck on the deck of the ship, and they amped up their lies to us, calling them illegals. And the trial judgment in the Tampa case, which we won by the way, although it was overturned on appeal a few days later, but the trial judgment was handed down in Melbourne at 2:15 in the afternoon on the 11th of September 2001. Think about that. On 9/11, 8 or 9 hours before the attack on America, the Tampa case judgment was handed down. And as soon as 9/11 had happened, the Howard government ramped up its references to illegals, and then I don't know if it was the Howard government or a later Liberal government that introduced the idea of the idea that these people were illegal, and border protection required that they be prevented from entering Australia, and sovereign borders was an offshoot of that, and the Australian Border Force was another offshoot of that. It made most Australians feel fearful of the possibility that people from a different country would come to Australia seeking asylum, and even though the numbers are tiny. And we have spent vast amounts of money trying to keep them away. It was the Labor government, I'm sorry to say, who introduced compulsory offshore processing in 2013. That meant, first of all, using Nauru for family groups and Manus Island in Papua New Guinea for men travelling on their own. The effect of that was vast expense. I mean, Nauru is broke, and Nauru got lots and lots of money from it. Since 2013, we have spent about $9 billion locking up people offshore. $9 billion, that's $9,000 million. Incredible amount of money. And it's your money, taxpayer money. Sorry, I'm just checking my notes to see what bits I've left out. Skirted over a number of things. We need to remember, every time we're here in acknowledgement of country, we need to remember what we've done to Aboriginal people and what we are doing to people from other countries. People mostly fleeing other countries because of the failure of indemnity or integration. People fleeing because of religious intolerance. Now, I have to say, and I hesitate to say it on a day like this, I do not adhere to any religion, and I'm very glad to see someone here wearing Muslim dress, because, to be candid, I mean, when I was a kid, the big religious divide was between Roman Catholics and Protestants. Then it became a divide between Christians and Muslims, or Christians and Jews, and then between people of Abrahamic religion and others. And it's absolutely hopeless. It is not tolerable. If you want to know what human rights are about, think about what we've done to Aboriginal people. Think of what we've done to asylum seekers, boat people. Boat people get locked up. They get locked up, and the maximum number of years that they've been locked up is 10 or 11. Okay? They haven't committed any offence. They haven't had a trial. They haven't had any conviction. They get locked up for years on end, even though they have not committed any offence. Up until offshore processing was introduced, the average percentage of boat people coming to Australia who were assessed as genuine refugees was about 94%. Okay, so if people came here by boat because they couldn't get on a plane, they can't get on a plane because in order to get on a plane you've got to have an Australian passport or a visa to come to Australia. They can't get those. So what other way is there of escaping persecution? They do it by boat. It's typically much more expensive than a first-class airline ticket, but that's the way it goes. Now, if you want to test what human rights are about, forget all the complicated legal tests. Think about it. How would you feel if you or your spouse or your brother or sister or your parents were treated the way that we are treating Aboriginal people and boat people? Think about that. That is the acid test for human rights. How it would feel if you were treated that way. Now, as I said earlier, Aboriginal culture has survived in this country for between 50 and 60,000 years. We turn up 250 years ago, approximately, and we treat Aborigines as though they're worse than imaginable. That is one of the greatest human rights abuses that we can ever inflict on anyone. And then some people escaping religious persecution seek protection here as refugees, and we treat them almost as badly. We just lock them up. We call them illegals even though they haven't committed an offence. We lock them up even though they haven't had a trial. There are much better ways of dealing with refugees. Think about it. In the world there are about 80 million refugees, but the population of the world at the moment is about 8,000 million people. So if every country agreed to increase its population by just 1%, we could house every refugee in the world. Now, that is something which Australia should be using its political wherewithal to argue for. We really should be arguing for ways of treating refugees better, because eventually, if my second point about climate change comes good, we will have a lot of refugees in the world, and it may include us, because we come from an incredibly hot country. There are other possibilities for the treatment of asylum seekers. One is to have processing of asylum seekers offshore in places like Malaysia or Indonesia. Don't wait for them to get here. Don't use the offshore processing system which we have, but assess them before they get on the boat. And if we were to do that, and if we got the cooperation of other countries, then we could take them immediately from Malaysia or Indonesia, as the case may be, and fly them safely to Australia, New Zealand, Sweden, Norway, whatever. Those are two methods that would work. Maybe we need a government that is prepared to think about other ways of dealing with what is potentially a problem, but not really a problem. We've got a lot of people in the community at the moment who arrive here as boat people, who are given temporary protection visas and are still locked up or living in community detention. We need to treat them like real people and move them to other countries, or this country, or allow them to stay in this country. What about the family from Biloela? I'm very relieved to see that the present new government has agreed to let that family return to Biloela. I mean, the two girls' kids were born in Australia. What, are we going to deport them, or are we going to break up the family? The only rational way of dealing with that is to say the entire family can be accepted here as refugees, they can live here. But the other human rights issue I want to touch on briefly before we go to Q&A, which is like half an hour ago, is climate change. Climate change is a human rights issue because it affects the way the human race will be able to live on this planet. Now, unless you're Elon Musk and you've got access to a rocket that will take you to Mars, that's pretty important to all of us. And by the way, the mechanism of it is really simple and has been known for a long time. The mechanism is that carbon-based molecules in the atmosphere can't prevent the escape of infrared heat, and that means that the planet warms up. Now, how long has this been known? I wonder if anyone in this room knows. It was first written about in a paper by Eunice Foote in 1856, nearly 170 years ago. Think about that. 170 years we've known about the mechanism and we've done nothing. Mind you, Eunice Foote had two difficulties. One, she was woman. Two, she was a feminist, and in 1856 that was not a good look. Her work was taken by a male scientist from Britain called John Tyndall. John Tyndall wrote about it in 1859. Then in 1894 or thereabouts, a Swedish guy called Svante Arrhenius wrote a paper which has never been questioned, which shows the effect on average global climate, on the one hand, of various percentages of carbon-based molecules in the atmosphere. His work has never been doubted. So from at least 1894, we have known about the consequences of what we're doing. We could go back earlier than that and think about the work of Isaac Newton, because Isaac Newton famously wrote about the fact that energy sources could not be destroyed, and if energy is created by the sun, which it is, heat energy at least is created by the sun, and if we prevent the heat if the heat is unable to escape because of carbon-based molecules in the atmosphere, then plainly the energy in the earth is going to increase. Because when you think about it, lighting a fire with wood or coal, using wood or coal in any way to generate heat, is using sunshine from millions of years ago, and that's something which we can't continue to do. We really cannot. We need to use sunshine as it affects the earth, and we need to prevent us from using sunshine that arrived here millions of years ago, because unless we do that, we will all die as a result. Unfortunately, the government that's just gone out didn't seem to notice that global flooding and bushfires were an early sign of the consequences of global warming. Still, that's the way it goes. We need to take climate change a bit more seriously than we do. We need to remember that it is the ultimate human rights issue. Okay, so I apologise for not speaking more about the importance of different races and different religious groups working together. I mean, if only harmony days happened everywhere, every time, every year. Imagine how good that would be. How would the planet improve if everyone was queuing up outside to come to a lunch like this? So, thank you.
Thank you, Julian. So we have a roving mic going around for Q&As, and I'll just point, and then the mic will go there. So if you have any questions, just... So I think we have a hand in the back there. Just over there. Towards the back.
I'm glad, by the way, to see that his notes include a reference to 170 years ago. It's a key point.
Good afternoon, Julian, and everybody else who are all interested in harmony and working together. Now, my question is, we talk everything human rights, but we never talk what are human obligations to each.
From escalating. But, you know, the treatment of Afghan refugees has been appalling. Really has. And most of the Afghan refugees have been Hazaras, who originally came into the country we now call Afghanistan. They originally came in there as descendants of Genghis Khan through Bamiyan. They were Buddhists, and they constructed the enormous Bamiyan Buddhas. Okay? After a while, being pragmatic, they decided they'd better embrace Islam, but they became Sunni Muslims rather than, they became Shia Muslims rather than Sunni Muslims. That was a big problem for them because it was a bit like a person coming to Australia deciding to be Roman Catholic rather than deciding to be Protestant in the 1950s. Not a good move. Anyway, that's how I would deal with your third question.
We touch at the moment on what are the human obligations.
I think we need to pass the mic around to others. Thank you so much. I think we have a hand just at the back there. Oh, sorry, didn't see you there.
That's all right. I just want to congratulate you for the work that you and your amazing wife have done. It's unbelievable. You have left a legacy that we should all follow. And the fact that you took in refugees is just fantastic. Your work speaks volumes for the sort of person you are and your lovely wife. It's brilliant work, and what you say about the Hazaras is so true. I'll just give an example. Myself and one of my colleagues were working with a young boy, a Hazara boy, and he was on some sort of a bridging visa or so on, and then the government had said, you've got to go back to Afghanistan, and he tried to argue with Paul Pitt, when I go back, the Taliban are going to get me, they're going to shoot me as soon as I get off the plane, and it was really hard. We ended up putting in a request to Swinburne University, and Wade was still working for Swinburne, and they gave him a scholarship, and now he's gone to country New South Wales studying there under the program where if you go into country areas and study, your visa's extended and so on. So it's heartbreaking for all communities to see this happening. It's really, really heartbreaking. I commend you on your work. You should both be so proud of yourselves. Well done.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say that. I should say the idea of spare rooms for refugees was Kate's idea. She, as soon as came back, she was deeply offended by the Tanta case, and she said, look, most Australian houses have got a spare room. We should set up spare rooms for refugees. And I said to her, well, if we're going to do that, we have to lead by example. And so from late 2001, we've had refugees living with us.
Hi Julian, my question, my name is Aisha Baks. I'm from Asylum, which is a Muslim arts organization. We respond to Islamophobia through arts, culture and cuisine. And what you spoke about really connects with us, and I have to say you're an absolute hero in our organization because of your truth-telling, your hard-hitting truth. And the 4 or 5 communities we focus on showcasing the culture, whether it's the Kashmiris, the Palestinians, the Uyghurs, the Hazaras, or the Rohingyas, is and seeing you as a crusader, it was really an inspiring talk. So my question is, every time I've heard you, and our team here, the Asylum Festival, we get really inspired by that. But when we go back, you talk about urging leaders, you know, looking at, but what we realized is, when you look at top leadership, the change, to create change, is actually quite difficult, but that's why we do what we do at Asylum Fest, is change at grassroots level. So when we go back after your talk, we are very inspired, but could you give us small steps that everyone in this room could do, or we, or other people from organizations could do on our part? Because you're here, and we're thinking of the baby steps we would take. So thank you for being, and we are very blessed to share this space with you, and I'm proud that we are in the city that you live in. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you. Okay, one step. Do whatever you can to make the government acknowledge that locking people up is not a good idea. Locking people up who haven't committed an offence is not a good idea. Can I say, I do think that initial mandatory detention makes some sense, but it should be limited to 2 weeks, which is enough time for preliminary health and security checks. But if a person is locked up for 2 weeks and they are not found to be a health or security risk, why should they remain locked up at vast expense to all of us? It's ludicrous. So do whatever you can, speak to whatever politicians you can to prevent mandatory detention, except for those limited initial purposes. Because that is the big human rights problem, I think.
Thanks very much. I think just 3 quick observations, not really questions. One, I think we're very fortunate to be in this country and to be able to sit together and discuss these questions and answers, because otherwise in many countries of the world we would be sitting behind bars to be able to even raise these questions or answer them. The second thing I wanted to say is that, keeping in mind what you said about faith and religion, we are a lot of interfaith networks in this room, and most of the interfaith networks actually welcome people of all faiths and no faith. So we've got humanists, atheists, people of spiritual, yoga instructors, peace organizations in our interfaith networks. I just thought I'd point that out.
Thank you very much for that, because I don't feel so excluded now.
And I also wanted to say that it's National Reconciliation Week and Sorry Day that we are in currently, so honouring our Aboriginal First Persons.
Thank you.
Alright, so this isn't a question, but this reminds me of whenever I go to and from Melbourne Uni, it reminds me of the refugees that have been locked up in the Park Hotel just off Swanston Street. And these refugees have been there for 9 years, and it's really heartbreaking, because I actually go past there every day.
I completely agree with that. By the way, the people in the Park Hotel have been moved out now. I'd like to take credit for that, because I went to the Park Hotel not long before, but I think it was an independent move. Incidentally, there was a guy who came to Australia in, I think, 2014, because offshore processing was automatic, he was sent to Manus Island. Okay, he had no say in the matter. He was very quickly assessed by the PNG authorities to be a genuine refugee, but remained locked up in Manus for 6 years until eventually he developed a cardiac problem. And so under the now repealed Medivac legislation, he was brought to Australia by Australia for cardiac treatment. He was eventually sent to America under our refugee swap deal with them, but he never got the cardiac treatment he was brought here for. He didn't get it, even though we brought him here for it. He didn't get treated. So that's a human rights abuse of a major scale. Okay.
My question is about First Nations. I would like to know what your opinion is on the Uluru Statement of the Heart, the Indigenous voice in Parliament, and the possibility of referendum. How do you think it will play out?
Slowly. It'll play out slowly. I agree with the idea that Aboriginal people should have a voice in Parliament. If that's going to be embedded in the Constitution, then a referendum is necessary. So that will slow it all down, but I think it's a good idea. I mean, good God, Aboriginal people have been here for 50 or 60,000 years. We've been here for 250 years. Why shouldn't they have a say in the way the government runs?
Thanks, Julian. You've mentioned quite a bit of the history, the very recent history of Australia, the last 250 years, and the appalling things that have happened there. You've mentioned quite a bit of the history of the treatment of asylum seekers, refugees. I understand you recently got a new government. I'm wondering what you see. You may have mentioned some of these already, but in terms of human rights, what do you see as the major challenges for the new government?
I think the major challenge for the new government will be to overcome all of the lies which were told by the previous government. I mean, people naturally believe what their government says, and if people believe that boat people are illegal in some way, what do we do with criminals? We lock them up. So I think overcoming all of the dishonesty of the previous government is going to be very important. Mind you, I think also an ICAC, a federal ICAC, is going to be very important because that will clout them for dishonesty that results in direct financial benefit. So I hope that answers the question.
I'm Arnold. I'm an advocate for stopping addressing climate change here. My question is that why are the two biggest polluters of the world, China and India, allowed to reach their target by 2050, whereas the democratic countries are persecuted to reach that target by 2030? So why is this difference? Why are they also being compelled? Why? Because the democratic countries are gaining benefits by getting cheaper products produced there. To pollute that world, but we are, the democratic world has to resort to 2030 zero pollution. I find this an anomaly.
That goes a bit beyond what I know about the IPCC's recommendations or the Tokyo Agreement. I got interested in this subject in November 2018 when the IPCC put out an interim report which said that unless the world takes active steps to combat climate change by 2030, it will be too late. And the "it will be too late" struck me as being a devastating possibility. Of course, for most politicians in countries like this, it doesn't matter because they'll be long gone by the time the consequences are noticeable. Unless the former government is prepared to acknowledge that the bushfires and the flooding were consequences of climate change.
Julian, I am standing again. I'm sorry to repeat that question.
Apologies. Julian, I just thought I'd just interject for a bit. We probably might do about 4 more questions because I'm sure you're tired standing on the stage for more than an hour. So about 4 or 5 more questions, and then we'll move on to the next segment.
My question is the original one, that we are trying to fix the whole universe problem, but we are not addressing what we can do as an individual. I want to know that, what we can do as an individual. This Harmony Day is a day when we should all be complimenting each other, should be standing for each other. So I would like to know what your wisdom says, that how and when and where we can work together to know our human obligations, not rights. Everybody tells us about our rights, but nobody tells about obligations. So please highlight a few things on that subject.
Yeah, that I think was the point you made earlier. Protecting human rights is an obligation that strikes all of us. What we can do about the breaches of human rights that I've concentrated on is probably best. It depends on who you are and how connected you are. I mean, you could do a lot. But speaking to your local parliamentarian, federal, is a good start. Speaking to your friends so that they know the facts is also a good start. I mean, getting the word out to people is profoundly important, in my opinion. You don't get persuaded by that. Well,
with Jackson Hamza. I might just briefly touch base and respond to this gentleman's very good valid question on sustainability and global emissions and so forth. I agree that while China and India are major polluters, there is also North America is also a major polluter. In terms of Kyoto Protocol and sustainability and reducing the carbon footprints, globally there is a big push from a lot of governments towards reducing the carbon emissions and reducing the global footprint. Just to touch base clearly on the world situation in the last 80 years, every major economy has got opportunity to develop their economy, industrialization, getting benefit out of it. At the same time, so-called developing countries are taking the same path, what has been led by a lot of North American countries, Western world and so forth. So there is a significant decision made in the Kyoto Protocol and also most recently Australian commitment by reducing the global emissions by 2030. Just to finalize some of these things, while every government has got their own initiatives and commitments, I think everyone should be given an opportunity to the world, whether it is 2030 or 2050, the rest of the world need to catch up. And we should not eliminate any particular sector or a country reducing their opportunity to develop economically.
Can I say, in building on that, I think 2030 is a desirable target because it reminds people how urgent things are. You know, we really want to hold the world's temperature increase to 1.5 degrees if possible. If we regard 2050 as the target and not 2030, then we will get more than 1.5 degrees temperature increase. We have to take it seriously. We have to make sure that everyone understands how serious it is. Oh, thank you. No, I've got a problem down here where I spilled on the table.
Excellent, no worries. Are there any more questions for Julian? Excellent.
I just want to congratulate you, Julian, on your vision. I just hope even a small percentage of that vision is adopted by the government, the world will be a much better place. And another thing I just wanted to highlight is that a lot of the refugees are caused by wars. When the wars are started, just to give you an example of the Afghanistan war, they started the war to get rid of the Taliban. 20 years and trillions of dollars and millions of deaths. What did they do? They returned it back to the Taliban. So shouldn't we be making a little bit more effort in promoting peace? When the warmongers come up, there's a lot of euphoria about creating war and going to war, etc. But very little is done to promote peace before the war starts. And that causes a lot of refugees. I just wanted to know your view about that.
I agree with your observation, and by the way, I saw a placard a little while back that it took 4 US presidents and $20 billion to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. So we need to pay attention to what is going on. I mean, really, any way you come at it, we have to pay attention to what's going on. And we have to acknowledge how important these problems are. Because if you were Hazara, if you were trying to flee Afghanistan, you would see the world very differently than the rest of us here. I mean, the Pashtun, not so long ago in Afghanistan, stopped the bus, got everyone out. All the people who were Pashtun were allowed back on the bus, but the Hazaras were shot dead on the spot, and then the bus drove off. That's what the Taliban and its rule does. And the Taliban recently brought in a rule saying that girls must cover their faces, even if they're reporters on the news, and that girls older than 16 cannot go to school. No, that's outrageous. How would you feel if that was being done to you?
We'll take our last question, and then we'll move on.
Thanks very much, Julian. Just wondering, you support nuclear energy as a viable alternative to fossil fuels.
Sorry, do I support nuclear?
Nuclear power, nuclear energy as a viable alternative to fossil fuels.
In theory, yes, but in practice, there's a problem. A safe nuclear plant requires a vast amount of concrete. Concrete production involves enormous CO2 offshoots, and we don't yet know. It seems to know that we do not know what sort of nuclear power is safe.
But windmills require a lot of concrete as well.
I'm sorry?
Windmills require a lot of concrete as well. Windmills do?
Do they? I didn't know that.
Yeah, the towers.
Yeah.
So is that you have a problem with windmills as well?
No, I don't. I don't think they need anything like the amount of concrete that a nuclear power station needs. And I think the importance of that is very significant. But if nuclear power could be guaranteed safe and not contributing to climate change, then it's a rational way of dealing with things.
I'd just like to say, first of all, thank you for what you're doing. Really appreciate it like the rest of us here. I think there's one resource that we're overlooking. I'm a teacher, and I have a program that I use called Youth for Human Rights, and our aim is to make children advocates for human rights, and we want to create an army. Can you imagine if we had all of us were working on a program, the same program, and joining together to be able to fight these things that you're talking about. You say we. I would like to make a we, all of us, and through our children. We run a program that's based on the United Nations Declaration for Human Rights. I mean, they're all there. There are 30 human rights, and when we go out to survey, not many people know their human rights. So that's a resource that I'm pushing, because like you, it's disgusting what is going on. I totally believe that. If anyone wants to help join the battle, I've got 10,000 teachers using our program at the moment in Australia.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to everyone who asked questions, and as well to Julian.